You came to the festival with Dune Part 2, so I want to start with it. The opening of the film is my favorite scene in cinema this year, so could you tell us something about the realization process of it?
Of the eclipse
Yes.
scene? Yep. Denis had written a scene where the Harkonnen had tracked them into the desert. It happened a few hours after we left them on Part 1. And Denis' comment to me, I think his official quote was, if we go back and we're in the same light that we finished the movie in last time, it'll feel like we're putting on a pair of old wet swimmers, which I found to be really interesting. I think he and Joe had devised that kind of way of describing what it would feel like if we just went back to the same lighting style as Part 1. So he wanted to potentially shoot it at night time or at dusk or at dawn or something, and none of those really worked. So I recommended we look at shooting through the back of a negative, which is to shoot through an emulsion, which means everything becomes red and dark and a bit eerie. Wasn't really feasible to do that, but it spawned the idea of maybe a deep infrared type look where all the blues and the greens of the light had been taken away. And so that then led to the idea of an eclipse. So it started with a look first, and then because it's sci-fi, Denis was able to back the sci-fi into the look, which meant that the look came first and then the eclipse came second.
I'm also curious about the black and white scene on the Harkonnen planet. Mm-hmm. How did its realization differ from every other scene in the movie, both technically and creatively?
Well, that was Denis coming to me saying, I've just written this scene. It's a gladiator-style scene, but it's outside at the moment. And if it's outside, I think it should be black and white because the sun doesn't produce the same colour, doesn't produce colour the normal way. And of course, anytime somebody says, let's shoot black and white, I'm going to jump at it because I love black and white. But for me, it felt a little bit like if we went to black and white, I was wondering why we were going to do that. Like it needed to be very clear to the audience what was happening. Like the sun doesn't emit colour. Well, you need to explain that. And how do you explain that? And just by going black and white, maybe it wasn't strong enough. So that's when I showed him some infrared tests that I've done in the past. And then I did some more infrared tests where the skin gets a sort of porcelain see-throughness to it. And it's more interesting than black and white for that because what it does instantly, it doesn't look like black and white, even though it is black and white, but there's something more than black and white for the audience to take on. So when the scenes go from colour to black and white, then hopefully the audience gets an idea of what's going on, where they're coming out into the sun, therefore the sun doesn't produce colour.
Which scene in the film did you find most challenging to execute?
The entire film was full of challenges. You know, everything in the film had a degree of difficulty about it that I've never experienced before. Like scene 10, I keep calling it scene 10 because that's the scene in the film, which is the eclipse scene. The tricky part with that was that was written for one location that Denis we had shot on Part 1. When we went to scout that location, we realized it didn't work. There was too many elements. You know, we had to have the body lying on a hill, they had to come down the hill, they had to then go down further and hide, go around a corner, then they had to go up to the top of the mountain. Like the location that had been written didn't quite work in this one location. So we found about 12 different locations for one location. Now the difficulty with that technically is that everything needs to be shot at a certain time of day to either be in sun, backlit that way, or backlit this way, or when they go into the shadow, then it's in shadow somewhere. And we were shooting that in winter, which meant that the sun was lower, which meant that we had shorter windows where the area was in sun or shade. So, and we had short days. And each of those locations were not next to each other. They were a day travel apart. So it meant that we had to be very careful to make sure that every scene was shot the way it needed to be shot by the end of the day. We couldn't come back the next day and redo it. So challenges for something like that were massive because everything was so far away.
I remember that after the Dune Part 1, I thought that this world couldn't be captured in a more beautiful way. And then I saw Dune Part 2.
Oh, really?
So I wonder what, if anything, changed in your approach between these two films?
We didn't shoot anamorphic on Part 2. Technically, we didn't need to because Part 1 anamorphic was more for Caladan. So Part 2, now we were in Paul's expanded universe. We were more in an IMAX ratio, which meant that we were spherical. The same post-process occurred. Like we still went through a film out. We still shot with the Alexa LF and 65. But we sort of were a little bit more bold when it came to decisions like the infrared gladiator scene. That was a choice that we made that we couldn't go back from. We couldn't in 6 months' time say, yeah, you know what, it's too much. We had to commit to that. And it was expensive in some ways because we were committing to 3D rigs. The lighting of the scenes inside needed tungsten lighting, which we didn't have. We had to get that. Like, there was many reasons not to do it, technically. But we committed to it and tried to be bold. I think that was the main thing, is that everything we did, we tried to be bold. And we tried to be more bold than we were in Part 1.
The creator was famously shot on very cheap camera, which is Sony FX3. I wonder what motivated this decision.
Well, when you say really cheap, I mean, I don't think it's really cheap. I think it's a high value bit of product. Whether it's cheaper than other cameras is a discussion. What motivated that? Because we wanted a camera that was small. Because, you know, from the outset, if it's a smaller capturing body, everything from that point can be smaller, including the gimbal, including the lenses, including the follow focus, including the cranes used to move it, including the drones. So it's a knock-on effect of size. But more than that, I think more important than that, it's not just about the size, it's about the look. The FX3, we were shooting at 12,800 ASA as a base, and it looked amazing. Like the technology that goes into those cameras, you know, and I've stood here at this festival and spoken to all the camera companies and said the same thing. Like the technology that's gone into that camera that gives us that, I want to see more of it, because I want to see more people shooting at 12,800 ASA. I want to see more people shooting in places that ordinarily they could never shoot because there wasn't enough light. So it opens up a whole new world of locations and stories if we can shoot films at 12,800 ASA.
This might be a tough one. Of all the films you work on, which cinematography are you most proud of?
That is a tough one to answer, because in talking about the creator, like I'm super pumped that we were able to make a movie with products that people would have ordinarily scoffed at. You know what I mean? Like if a film student goes to make a film on an FX3, people will go, come on. But we were able to make a film on it, and we were able to make, I think, you know, visually a really successful film. You know, Dune Part 2 and Part 1, to me, I see it as one story. I'm super happy with the work that we did on that. It was super hard work. Batman, I loved. It was a tough movie. We shot that over COVID. You know, and every day, you know, it was a fine balancing act between seeing too much and not seeing enough, and having a mood, creating a mood. So it was probably one of the hardest lighting jobs that I've ever done, which was the Batman. Going back a few years, I mean, I've just recently started rewatching some films that I did years ago, because I can only really watch films if they're old. Like Bright Star I love, Foxcatcher I love, Zero Dark 30, I don't know, I can't tell.
And to follow up, do you have a single shot you've created that stands out as maybe not the best one, but as a personal favorite of yours?
I drove into Pinewood Studios the other week, and up on the poster is a shot that looks very much like the shot that we did in Rogue One, the Darth Vader scene at the end, where Darth turns on his lightsaber. And there's a poster up at Pinewood that I don't know if it's that shot exactly, or it's that representation, or it's a representation of that time. And I think that's beautiful. I mean, as a Star Wars nerd, from being a little 5-year-old looking at Darth Vader, to be able to create something that's, I mean, Darth's pretty cool anyway, but to be able to create something in that universe, you know, I think it's, I don't know, to create iconography, to create stuff that people respond to, I'm most proud of.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, mate.